Welcome to this next episode of YouTube, where we can really state that winter, or at least Minnesota's definition of winter, has finally arrived. We've had a couple of nights of 20 below weather, and because of the timing of the year and the colder weather, we are seeing a little bit of an increase in dominance. And here you can see Aiden on the top of the hill posturing, and actually that's a little bit of a bark from Denali. A bark is a threat display, kind of a warning, so that's a little bit more intense than we've seen before. Now, the interesting thing is these again usually are stimulated when wolf care come in. Aiden gets pretty excited. That excitement leads to a little dominance, and a little dominance leads to some aggression. They do settle down pretty quickly, either during wolf care when we're able to interact, or after wolf care. It does stimulate Shadow Malik, and they hear this dominance, and they do let out a little bit of a howl, usually led by Shadow. And then Aiden will come on down and try to interact with wolf care staff. It's always a challenge with the camera because obviously your hands are occupied, so you can't really deal with the wolf the way you normally would deal with them, and so you can see a little bit of wobbly camera angle there. That's because of Aiden. And then of course Denali is coming up to try to approach and interact. But after about maybe 20 minutes of this kind of chasing, they kind of settle down, they settle into the straw beds. They're still not responding as well, or as they had traditionally been responding to Shadow Malik. Denali still does, but Aiden doesn't nearly as much. And like I say, once we get into the greeting, this is what we usually have, is Aiden, who is willingly submitting to wolf care staff on a regular basis. So his dominance is not necessarily extending into a test of staff. It's primarily just of Denali. So here's Denali. Again, once he settles down a little bit, kind of goes into the backdrop there and walks the fence line along Grizzer's enclosure, and then he's going to try to let out a little bit of a howl. Or not. I thought I clipped it where he was howling, but he didn't howl much. It was just a pretty short period of time, and that was it. And then, but Grizzer does howl with Shadow Malik, and this was actually from the surveillance camera. And then Grizzer in real live action when we're doing some wolf care. I think I've mentioned this before, when we do straw, which we do for all the wolves here to give them that a little bit more comfort, and certainly gives them an opportunity to lay in the areas where the cameras are located. Grizzer gets a little predatory towards the rake, and so we've been seeing that a few times before and continue to see it. Good stimulus for him, as long as the wolf care staff are cautious that he doesn't grab the rake and hit one of us in the head with it. We're okay with him getting a little bit stimulated by it. And this morning that this was filmed was about 20, probably still about 20 below at 7:30 in the morning, and so temperatures are real cold. And you notice just the thick coat design that these animals have. They are really adapted for cold weather. If anything, there's a little frost around their eyelids, just from their condensation from their breath. So this is that predatory drive, and like I say, wolf care staff are pretty careful not to let him grab it. One thing to note, in the area on the top of his head that is not completely healed, there was obviously a concern that was going to get cold or have some issues with frostbite, but his hair is really thick on that part of his head, and you see no indication of heat loss or frosting up around that scarred area. So he's doing real good. He's well insulated and having no trouble whatsoever, other than the rake, which is really not trouble. So in retirement, we see Shadow doing an RLU, marking kind of the edge of the den site there. And as we were looking at surveillance camera, we see that this is not just a daytime occurrence, and we see him doing an RLU on the surveillance cameras in the exact same spot. So that appears to be a marking area, and then scraping of the ground in front of the den. Pretty excitable scraping there. And then other surveillance camera video showed this. One of the things about the surveillance camera tells us time when they do get up and start moving around. And Shadow does a fore and an aft stretch, and then smells a deer leg and decides to do a scent roll on it. So that's how he gets up in the morning. So we usually can tell when they're up and moving around and get a good sense of, how restful it's been. If there's activity in the middle of the night, certainly that might warrant us to go take a look at some tracks outside the pen and see if there was anything visiting on the outside secondary fence that may have stimulated them to get up. But there isn't much going on in here. And the morning check was pretty calm, even though the day was sub-zero weather. Shadow has some caches towards the back of the pen. Still a limited amount of snow cover for really good caches, so we're starting to see some areas where the dirt has been dug up, and they are still managing to get down below the frost line. That'll soon change within a few more nights of 20 below. But the other thing that's been different this week is we're seeing a lot more raven activity, and it is kind of the raven breeding season, as well as a lot of extra food in this cold weather is a resource for ravens as well. So Malik's really keyed in on the sound of ravens as they get up. Ravens are diurnal, active in the daytime, so as daylight approaches, that's when the raven activity picks up, and you'll hear the ravens as well as see them interact within the wolf enclosure. Sometimes they'll be right on the ground trying to take caches, but most of the time it's that sound, that background sound that the wolves are so familiar with. Malik's watching as they fly overhead, so not only the sound but also the sight of them as they come in to check out perches above the enclosure. That's about it for retirement. Shadow had a little bit stiff joints earlier in the week, but the straw bed seemed to keep him pretty comfortable. And for Oscar this week, we chose some surveillance video, and you might have seen Grizzer here in the first clip just kind of running with his tail wagging, and Oscar was outside, and you see Oscar approaching the fence. Oscar's actually doing some barking, and differing than a wolf bark where that might be an alarm sound, it's kind of an excitability for Grizzer. And so he goes down and he's face to face with Oscar, gets down at Oscar's level, tail wags. And why we know that this is not an aggressive encounter from Grizzer is the next thing he does is submits to Oscar. So he rolls over on his back and is doing a full submission to Oscar. And that's certainly an animal who's pretty comfortable to roll over and submit. That's Oscar's job, to provide some stimulus to Grizzer because he is managed alone, and we can see that it works pretty well. And obviously, there are some trade-offs. Oscar is not the easiest dog to manage for people. He's not your typical pet. But, of course, a typical pet would probably not have the confidence or wherewithal to be able to face wolves twice his size and be confident and engaging and not back down or show any intimidation whatsoever. And that's what Oscar does. And not only Grizzer, Denali and Aiden are stimulated by him as well. So that's it for wolf care. Things going on here is a few face-offs, some curl rests because of the cold with a little bit of frosty faces, and wolves looking in their prime in the middle of the winter. Thanks for watching.